Hey everyone, welcome to the first video of Jeff Plays Cards. What this is pretty much going to be is a introduction video on how to play cribbage. And what I've decided I'm going to do is I'm going to throw you guys into the deep end and show you guys a real cribbage match that I played. But however, if I do feel that there is a place for more discussion, I'll bring you guys away from this screen and expand on it a little bit more. Alright, so first up, let's get some foundational things out of the way. Cribbage is traditionally played with 2 players. You can play it with 3 players, but for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to talk about the version with 2 players. Now, and the objective of cribbage is to gain 121 points, or 61 points if you're playing the shorter version. And how you get those points is a point that I'll be expanding on throughout this video. Alright, so cribbage has 4 phases: the discard phase, the play phase, the hand count, and the crib count. So basically, the first thing that you want to do when you're in the discard phase is decide who's going to get the crib first. And you can pretty much do this however you'd like. The most common way of doing it is by cutting the deck and just seeing who gets the higher value. However, in the app that I'm using, it's pretty much decided for me. Since I am the yellow player, the app signifies that the crib is yellow, which shows that I get the crib first. There are specific terms for the player who gets the crib and the player who doesn't get the crib, but for simplicity's sake, let's just call the player that gets the crib the offensive player, because they're going to get more opportunities to score points. And we're going to call the player that does not get the crib the defensive player. Once you've decided who is going to get the crib, the rest of the discard phase is pretty easy. The offensive player is going to deal 6 cards to both players, and both players will get the time to look at their cards and just choose 2 cards that they're willing to discard and basically throw away into the crib. The crib doesn't really matter for now and can just be set aside for later use. It doesn't really do anything to the game until the last phase of the game. Once both players have had the chance to discard their 2 desired cards into the crib, you can now progress into the play phase of the game. During the play phase, another card will be cut from the deck, and both players will take turns basically playing their cards, starting from the defensive player. Once there are no cards in either of the player's hands, the play phase essentially ends and it moves to the next phase of the game. Now, there is an important concept to understand in the play phase called the count, where basically the value of all the cards that have been played are summed together to contribute to the count. The value of each card is pretty much worth its rank, and face cards are worth 10, while aces are worth 1. Now, the important thing here is that the count can never exceed 31. If the player that has the turn cannot play a card, the turn essentially goes back to the player that just played. And if neither player can play a card, the count resets to 0. You can kind of see an example of the play phase in action in the clip here. So first, my opponent started off by playing a 3. To which I countered with a 10, making the count 13. My opponent responded with a jack, which brought the count to 23. I cannot play the 2 10s in my hand because that would bring the count to 33, which is not allowed. So my only choice is to play the 5. Since my opponent does not have a card that is 3 or smaller, the count essentially resets to 0 and becomes my opponent's turn again. It should be noted that if I had a card or cards that were smaller than 3, I could have just kept playing those cards until I brought the card to 31 or as close to 31 as possible, even though I had just played the 5. Once the count resets to 0, you'll notice that me and my opponent essentially do the same thing again, playing cards until both of us have run out of cards. Another important part about the play phase is that it's the first real opportunity for both players to start scoring points. And both players can score these points in a variety of ways. And since there are quite a few ways of scoring points with a fair amount of explanation, this is the first time where I'm going to take you guys away from the clip and go to the drawing board to do a bit of discussion. Okay, so the first way of scoring points is if you were the player to last play a card, but without making the count 31. If you were that player that played a card, but didn't make the count 31, you receive 1 point. You may have seen this in the clip before, where I scored 1 point for bringing the count to 28 before the count reset. And you can see at the top of the screen, that brought me one step closer to the total of 121. The second way of scoring points is by causing the count to reach exactly 15 or exactly 31. The player that does this is awarded 2 points. We can show this with an example. Let's have player A and player B, with player A being the offensive player. So player B will start off by playing an 8, and if player A has a 7 and they play that 7, they cause the count to reach 15, and player A can score 2 points. However, it doesn't always need to be as straightforward or simple as that. Let's say that player B starts up with an 8 again, but player A this time responds with a 2. Player B can respond with a 4, let's say, and then if player A has an ace, they can play that ace, cause the count to reach 15, and score 2 points as well. The same goes for making the count reach 31 as well. Basically, any way that you can make the count 15 or 31 will count and give you 2 points. Another way of scoring points in the play phase is by playing pairs, 3 of a kinds, or 4 of a kinds. Let's jump right into an example for this one. For this example, let's have player B start off by playing a 4. Now, if player A also has a 4 and chooses to play this 4 on top of player B's 4, well, that essentially counts as a pair, and player A will score 2 points. Basically, anytime you play a double like that, you're going to score 2 points. Now, hypothetically, let's say that player B also had a 4 and decided to play that 4 on top of player A's 4. Well, now that counts as a 3 of a kind. And when you play a 3 of a kind like that, you'll score 6 points. So player B just scored 6 points. Now, hypothetically, let's say that player A had another 4 in their hand and decided to play that 4 on top of player B's other 4. Well, now that is a 4 of a kind. And whenever you play a 4 of a kind like that, you end up scoring 12 points. So this means that player A just scored 12 points. So basically, whenever you play a pair, a 3 of a kind, or a 4 of a kind during the play phase, you're going to score 2 or 6 or 12 points respectively. The final way that you can score in the play phase is by playing a run, which is basically a consecutive sequence of cards. Whenever a run is played during the play phase, the player that made that run is going to score a number of points that's equal to the number of cards in that run. I know that sounds a little bit confusing, so let's go to another example and show this to you guys. Okay, so in this example, let's have player B start off with a 4, and with player A following with a 2. What player B can do if they have a 3, they can play that 3, and then since those 3 cards, 2, 3, and 4, are all consecutive, player B can score 3 points for playing that run, which is made up of 3 cards. Notice that those 3 cards did not have to be played in order like 2, 3, 4. In fact, it was actually played 4, 2, and then 3. But however, there's still a consecutive sequence of cards. So the player B essentially scores 3 points. However, to add on top of that, let's say if player A had a 5 in their hand and they chose to play this 5, well, this basically extends the run to 4 cards because now it's 2, 3, 4, and 5. So now, since player A made a 4 card run, they will score 4 points. By the same logic, if player B had an ace or a 6 in their hand, they would be able to extend the run and make it a 5-card run. And if they did that, they would score 5 points. Basically, both players can basically alternate like that and keep scoring lots of points. I should probably also mention that runs need to be at least 3 cards long. For example, if player B started off by playing a 2 and player A followed by playing a 3, player A would not be able to score 2 points just because the 2 and the 3 are consecutive. It needs to be at least 3 cards for it to count as a run. There is another way where the offensive player can score points. Remember how I said at the beginning of the play phase, the deck is essentially cut again. And if the card that is cut is a jack, the offensive player can score 2 points. Okay, I know that was a lot of way of scoring points. So let me just recap a little bit. During the play phase, you can score 1 point for playing the last card but not making the count go to 31. You can also score 2 points by making the count go to exactly 15 or 31. You can score 2 points for playing a pair, 6 points for playing a 3 of a kind, or 12 points for playing a 4 of a kind. You can also score points by playing runs, and you score an amount of points that's equal to the number of cards in that run. And of course, you can also score points as the offensive player by cutting a jack from the deck of cards. You should also note that all of these methods of scoring in the play phase can be compounded upon each other to score more points. For example, let's have player B play a 4 and player A respond with a 6. Now, if player B played a 5 in response to that, they would actually score 5 points. 2 for making the count 15 and 3 for making a run of 4, 5, 6. Alright, so now that you know all the ways of scoring in the play phase, we can now move on to the hand count. So remember, as I said before, once both players have gotten rid of all their cards in the play phase, they can transition to the hand count phase by recollecting all the cards that they played in the play phase and counting the number of points associated with their hand. Note that you can also use the card that was cut at the beginning of the play phase to also count points for your hand. I know that the card that was cut at the beginning of the play phase was a very minor detail at the time, but it becomes much more significant and much more relevant in the hand count phase. Now, the way you score points in the hand count phase is actually pretty similar to the play phase, just with a few modifications here and there. So let's get into that right now. Let's first get the easy things out of the way. Pairs, 3 of a kinds, and 4 of a kinds will all still score 2, 6, and 12 points respectively. Runs also work in a similar manner as they did in the play phase, but in the hand count phase, it's also possible to have multiple runs in your hand. For example, let's have the 2 of diamonds, the 3 of diamonds, the 3 of clubs, and the 4 of diamonds as our hand. This would count as 2 runs because the 2 of diamonds, 3 of diamonds, and 4 of diamonds will all count as a run, while the 2 of diamonds, 3 of clubs, and 4 of diamonds will also count as a run. Now, note, you can also use the card that was cut at the beginning of the play phase as essentially a card in your hand. So if, say that card was a 2, well, we could create a whole bunch of other combinations of runs in our hand to give us even more points. You can also score 2 points for any combination of cards in your hand and the cut card that makes 15. For example, 9 and 6. 8 and 7, 10 and 5, 10, 3, ace, ace, 8, 4, 3. Any combination that makes 15 will end up giving you 2 points. Note that any combination that makes 31 will unfortunately not count in the hand count phase. Another major way of scoring points in the hand count phase is a flush, where basically if all 4 cards in your hand are of the same suit, you will be able to score 4 points. If the cut card also happens to be the same suit as all 4 cards in your hand, you will end up scoring 5 points. And finally, the last and probably most minor form of scoring points in the hand count is something called nibs. So basically, this occurs where if you have a jack in your hand and the suit of that jack matches the suit of the card that was cut, you will score 1 point. Also, one last very important detail about the hand count phase. The defensive player always gets to count their hand first. So even if you're the offensive player, even if you're 1 point away from 121 and winning the game, you still need to wait for the defensive player to count all of their points and add them to their total before you can secure that final point in your hand count. Now, once both players have counted all their points in the hand count, you can now move on to the final phase of the game, which is the crib count. Now, do you remember those 4 cards that both players discarded way back at the discard phase? Well, now that comes into use. The offensive player gets to reveal those cards and essentially count all the points that are associated with those cards along with the cut card and add those points to their point total. All the rules for counting points in the crib are essentially the same as in the hand count phase, but with one minor exception. You cannot score a 4-card flush. For example, if all 4 cards of the crib were of the same suit, that does not count. The 5th card, the cut card, also needs to be the same suit as the 4 cards in the crib. If that's the case, then the flush can be counted as 5 points. Once all the points in the crib have been counted, that's essentially a round of cribbage. During the next round, the offensive and defensive players switch roles, and the cycle repeats all over again. You keep going until one player reaches 121 points or 61 points. And that's basically how you play cribbage, everyone. Now, I know that feels a lot. Trust me, having the rules of card games explained to me also makes me want to split my brains out. So feel free to rewatch this video and just get a little bit more of a hold on what the rules of cribbage are. What I'll also do is I'll leave the rest of this cribbage match for you guys to watch, just so you guys can get a little bit more of a sense of what a real cribbage match looks like. That's it for me. Have a blessed day, everyone.